Hello again, all of you fantastic fifth graders of Knox County Schools. My name is Miss Maxie, and I teach fifth grade social studies and science at Farragut Intermediate School. I am back with you again this week for the social studies portion of KCS at home. Now, I know that I told you that Mrs. Lenz would be with you this week, and you all would be traveling down the wilderness road. But we made some adjustments. We made some changes. Mix it up. So I am back with you again a second week. I hope your first week using those educational resources went well and you really enjoyed learning in your new school setting. We are now living history, if you will. Living during this time will one day be recorded in the history books because we are experiencing unprecedented events firsthand. So, since we are living history, let's do history. I saw on the news that someone was going through their neighborhood and taking photographs of people on their front porches and journaling conversation with them from that safe 6 feet distance. And it, of course, being a history teacher, immediately made me think of the pictures that Lewis Hine took of child labor or the images that Dorothea Lange captured during the Great Depression. I'm hoping that you, too, are journaling, maybe taking pictures. I know I have a student that actually wrote a song and played it on her guitar. Keep a record of this time period because just like these images, they will be primary sources and will tell us a story of the events that happened firsthand. Now, I am sure that you have been showing off your knowledge by conscientiously doing the work that was provided for you during this extended closure and doing a superior job at it. Now, KCS is what we call an acronym or an abbreviation, and it's an abbreviation for Knox County Schools. So I took that acronym and made what is called an acrostic, meaning that I took each of those first letters from KCS and used them to describe you, knowledgeable, conscientious, and superior. Now keep that little tidbit of information, file it in the back of your head because we are going to refer back to it a little bit later. Can you remember the 3 standards and the information in those standards that we reviewed last week? Think, because there was so much information, I'm going to give you a little private think time to think about it. Oh, how I wish I could hear your responses, to hear all of your knowledge being told in such a superior way. So I'm just going to have to trust that you remembered. But if not, we are going to review as well. The first standard we looked at was 5.26, and that explained how the name Tennessee actually originated from a Yuchi word, Tanatasi, referring to where the rivers come together. Now, we know that one of Tennessee's natural resources, major natural resources, are all the rivers that we have in our state. We are going to discuss what those major ones are in a moment. The next standard we discussed was 5.27, and we identified the cultures and the names of the major indigenous or native people groups and settlements in Tennessee. Can we say those 4 together out loud? Here we go. Paleo, archaic, woodland, and Mississippian. Great job. Now, your first task, was to read a text. And it was actually from the Tennessee Blue Book, which was from the Tennessee Library and Archives. And it was the first chapter, The Land and Its People. After you read the text, I had provided you with a quiz and some discussion questions. So what we are going to do, we are going to go over your answers on that quiz as well as the discussion questions. So pull out those papers now. Okay, our first question was, which of the following statements about the effect of Tennessee's climate on agriculture is true? And that answer is A. Tennessee has a mild climate, which creates a long growing season for agriculture. Okay, number 2, which of the following is not a major river of Tennessee? That answer is B. The Missouri is not in Tennessee. We know that the Mississippi River is in West Tennessee. Memphis is a large city that is close to that. We know that the Cumberland is in the middle of our state, in the northern section. And we know that in East Tennessee begins the Tennessee River. We know that the Tennessee River starts in Knoxville, goes down through Chattanooga, dips down into Alabama, and then back into Tennessee to actually serve as a dividing point between Middle and West Tennessee. Okay, who were the first people in Tennessee? And that answer is C, the Paleo Indians. We know that paleo means, right, archaic. Okay, how did the Paleo Indians get food? Well, we discussed that they were nomads and they definitely were hunters, but your text also gave some additional information. So the best answer to this question is D. Paleo Indians were hunter-gatherers. And number 5, what evidence of Paleo Indians was found at the Coates Hines site? We know that is a very important archaeological site because they not only found mastodon bones, but those bones had cut marks and they found stone tools nearby. So with that being said, your correct answers are A and C. Now I do want you to notice it does say choose 2. I always point out to my students that we need to pay attention to precision. What that means is really look and see what that question is asking and what does it give you any directions? Well, it does. It tells us to choose 2. So if the question asks us to choose 2 answers, how many should we have? 2. Excellent. Okay, number 6. How did the development of agriculture by the archaic people impact their society? There's another choose 2. Well, their population grew and they formed large villages. Number 7. What change in the social structure of Native American groups occurred during the Woodland period? That correct answer is C. Woodland people became divided into different social classes. We know that they created tribal and agricultural societies, and they actually lived in permanent towns. Number 8. What was the purpose of the Pinson Mounds and the Old Stone Fort? The best answer to that question is C. They were used for ceremonies. We know that both of those locations are parks in Tennessee that you can go visit, and I hope that on those extension activities that you visited them virtually last week. But there are about, at the Penson Mound site, 17 American Indian mounds at that site alone. In the Old Stone Fort, we learned that really wasn't a fort at all. It actually is an archaeological site that shows remains of a stone wall, which tells us that their towns were actually fortified, protected. Okay, our next question is number 9. The complexity of the Mississippian society is shown by, choose 2, jewelry and pottery. Now, we know that these cultures, their pottery of the Woodland and the Mississippians were decorated. That was kind of a step up from the archaic people that created pottery. So we can see by that that the groups are getting more and more advanced. Number 10, how did contact with European explorers impact Native Americans in Tennessee? Now, this impact, I want you to think about it. Was it negative or was it positive? The correct answer is B. Native Americans died from diseases introduced by the Europeans. So if they died from these diseases, that of course would be great, a negative impact. Okay, number 11, what is the origin, or where did it come from? What's the beginning of the name Tennessee? Correct answer is A, came from the Yuchi word Tanasi. But we do know that it also wasn't officially used with its spelling until about the 1700s. And number 12, which of the following was created by the Mississippian people? B, the Chickasaw Indian Village. Great job. I hope that you had all of these answered. I hope that you got a majority of them correct. But remember, if you didn't, be sure and mark the correct answer choices, just so you have that. Okay, the next part of our first task had discussion questions. Now, if you'll notice on the screen that I don't have the questions listed, that is because, if you remember, I asked you to restate the question when you give your answer. You are fifth graders, and we're at the end of the year, so that means that you are getting ready for middle school. So writing in complete sentences is a definite must as you travel on to middle school next year. Okay, so let's go over these together. But let me first say, are your answers going to look exactly like mine? Well, of course not. But nevertheless, you may add to your answers by looking at mine and also check your answers to make sure that you do have the correct ones. Okay, number 1, Tennessee's climate is mild and has a positive effect on the growing season. According to paragraph 3 of the text, Tennessee possesses a climate favorable for people and agriculture, with abundant rainfall and mild temperatures, which create a long growing season for plants. I want us to notice a few things about number 1. I put a paragraph number. Why did I do that? I put a paragraph number because that shows where I found my answer. Notice I also used a quote. Those aren't my words. What I did, I quoted or cited evidence from the text to support my answer. And since those weren't my words, I did put those in quotation marks. Okay, number 2, Tennessee's major rivers, which create a long growing season. Excuse me, I just really said part of question number 1, didn't I? Number 2, Tennessee's major rivers, that's the right answer, are the Mississippi, the Tennessee, and Cumberland. Okay, number 3, the first people of Tennessee were the Paleo Indians, and they got food by hunting. According to paragraph 5, arrowheads and spear points were found in caves and rock shelters. Now notice I didn't use a quote, but I still cited my paragraph number. That meant that my answer I put in my own words, so I didn't need to use quotation marks because I was not pulling it straight from the text. Number 4, the coat's hindsight shows evidence that the Paleo peoples used stone tools to hunt mastodon. According to paragraph 5, mastodon bones with cut marks and stone tools were discovered at the site. Number 5, the development of agriculture by the archaic people impacted their society by giving them a dependable food supply and freed them from seasonal shortages of wild plant, game, foods, and game, according to paragraph 6. Now, number 7. Number 6. The change in the social structure of the Native American groups during the Woodland period was transitioning from hunter-gatherers to, quote, well-organized tribal agricultural societies living in large, permanent towns, according to paragraph 7, which then brings us to number 7. The purpose of the Penson Mounds was a ceremonial site with 17 mounds surrounded by an earthen wall. The purpose of the old stone fort was for defense of their town and as a ceremonial site as well. I'm noticing a lot of similar questions and crossovers from the quiz and these discussion questions, and I hope you noticed that as well. Number 8, the elaborate pottery and jewelry of the Mississippian period revealed that they were a complex society. Number 9, contact with European explorers impacted Native Americans in Tennessee by disease, warfare, and fur trade. And last but not least, number 10, the origin of the name Tennessee is from the Yuchi tribe living in East Tennessee, the word Tanasi, and may have originally been from the Yuchi word Hagohaji, which was the name given to the Tennessee River on many 18th century maps, according to paragraph 12. I know that took a lot of work on your part to restate all 10 questions, answer those questions in a complete sentence, and even put a paragraph number where your answer was found and quote evidence from the text or restate the text. But I am so glad you did this and you are just practicing those literacy skills. Our final standard we looked at last week was number 5.28. That is where we identified all of the pre-colonial American Indian tribes that resided in Tennessee. And the ones that we looked at specifically were 4. Can we say those aloud together? Here we go. Cherokee, Chickasaw, Creek, and Shawnee. Great job. And with each of those, if you remember, we looked at their customs and traditions. How did we do that? Let me move forward. We'll go back to that. You had information from the Gallopade text, that's your social studies textbook, and we read that information. You also went online or you had pages with information from sites that spoke about each one of those American Indian tribes. So you were supposed to use those 2 sources. That was doing some research, and then you're going to record them on this table. Okay? So let's look back at this map and those 4 tribes. We know that the Chickasaw, they were located here in West Tennessee along the Mississippi River. Now the Shawnee were around the Cumberland River. They were more of a nomadic group, but for a time period, they did reside or live in Tennessee near that area. The Creek were also in Middle Tennessee, but in the southern portion of Tennessee. And the Cherokee, their home was mainly in East Tennessee. Now, do not worry if you did not finish all of your charts or if you didn't get to it. Right now, make your own chart and fill in the information as we go along. Or if you have a device, you can even take a picture of your screen so that you have that information. You will need the information about these 4 American Indian tribes to do a fun activity we have later. So let's go over each one of these tribes and the major or the important information from them about their culture. First one, the Cherokee. We know that they lived in the mountains of East Tennessee. The men were hunters and fishermen, and they crafted weapons and went to war and made political decisions. The women, they planted, grew, and harvested crops. They cooked meals and made social decisions. And they made and wore jewelry from beads and copper. Now, their dwellings. This group had two dwellings. They had a winter and a summer home. The winter home were woven saplings that were plastered with mud. Their summer homes were open air dwellings with bark roofs. Now, their government, they had two types. They had a white government that ruled during the peace times, or they had a red government that oversaw during those war times. Now, I also asked you for each one of those tribes to write something that really stood out to you, something that you found interesting. Well, one thing that I thought was interesting about the Cherokee was that men and women all participated equally in their council meetings. That stood out to me because I know that women did not even gain the right to vote, even though they were U.S. citizens, until 1920. So if these American Indians allowed men and women to have equal participation in their government or council meetings, I thought that was a big deal. And also, Sequoia, of course, creating their first written language. Okay, the next tribe are the Chickasaw, and we know that they lived near the Mississippi River in West Tennessee. They lived on high ground because the Mississippi River often flooded, and they were semi-nomadic. The men were hunters and warriors, and the women cooked, cleaned, and looked after children and made jewelry. And this society was matrilineal. What that means is that their ancestry was traced on their mother's side, matra, that root word. They also had winter and summer homes. Their winter homes were large and built to protect against the cold. And their summer homes had two rooms, and they were open, a lot like those summer dwellings of the Cherokee. They had a very advanced government, and they even had provisions for punishing those who broke laws. And an interesting fact about the Chickasaw is that they enjoyed music, storytelling, arts, and crafts. They colored baskets, containers, did wood carvings, and even made pottery. Okay, our next tribe are the Creek, and their location is in Middle Tennessee, as we saw on our map earlier. They were not nomadic. The roles of the men, they were hunters and protectors. The women took care of the children. They farmed, they maintained crops, gathered fruits, herbs, and roots, and were also matrilineal. Their dwelling were huts with thatched roofs. Now, for their government, they would have a town square where they would meet, and they would also hold ceremonies there. An interesting fact, they made jewelry, baskets, pottery, wood carvings. And finally, our last tribe that we looked at was the Shawnee. They were located in Middle Tennessee near the Cumberland River. They were nomadic to protect their family and avoid fighting. We learned from that online source that was really their main reason from that source, that they were nomadic. The men went to war and protected their family and hunted and fished. The women were farmers and grew vegetables, made pottery, wood carvings, and beadwork, and wove bags and rugs. Their dwellings were called wigwams. They were made from bark and reed mats that they spread over a wood frame. Now, their religion, they believed that they were created by a great spirit, and they called that great spirit our grandmother. And one of their dances that they did during their ceremonies was called the Stomp Dance. An interesting fact about the Shawnee Indians are the most famous chief was Chickasaw, and the Shawnee means Southerner. Okay, great. So I hope you had all of that information. And by this time, I am sure that your brain feels like it has grown 3 sizes, kind of like the Grinch's heart. But we're going to make it grow even larger. Now, remember at the beginning of the lesson that I showed you the abbreviation or the acronym for KCS and said that was for Knox County Schools. And then I also told you that I made an acrostic about you, stating that you're knowledgeable, conscientious, and superior. But I am taking it a step further to kind of show you another example so that that will help you with a better understanding of your task today. I took our KCS at home and I took the first letters from each of those, and notice I just used the A because the at symbol is used inside of the red home, and I put those vertically. And from each of those first letters, I have made an acrostic poem. Knowledgeable, conscientious, superior students who all have opportunities to be marvelously educated. Okay, well, that reminds me of my class. In my class, we have a slogan, and we have a name and a slogan, and we are called Maxie's Marvels. Boy, do I love a good alliteration. And we have a chant that we say. I really don't even think I'm going to have to teach it to you because now you guys are Maxie's Marvels too. So I'm going to say the first part of the chant and see if you know what the second part might be. Are you ready? We are marvelous. Did you say bum ba dum bum 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 bum? I bet you did. Okay, let's do it again. We are marvelous. Bum ba dum bum 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 bum. Great job. Fantastic. Let's do some fireworks to show just how amazing and marvelous we really are. Okay, so we are now to the show what you know. And our task for this week is going to take each one of those pre-colonial American Indian tribes. We're going to take their name and we're going to create an acrostic poem for each of those names. But we are going to get the information to put in our acrostic poem from our research that we just went over on our table, the one that you gathered from your Gallup-Paid text and from the online sources about each American Indian tribe. Now, you can put information about their location, the roles of men and women, their dwelling, the government, religion, an interesting fact, any of your research. Now, I've given you yet another example, but I used those indigenous peoples, one of those groups. Notice that I chose archaic. So I wrote the word archaic, or the name of that people group, vertically, and out from each letter, I made a complete sentence and started that sentence with that letter. Let's go over it. A. After the Ice Age and the climate warmed, the archaic people adapted. R. Rock shelters were their homes. C. Culture survived longer than any other indigenous group. H. Hunters of small animals and gatherers of nuts, roots, and berries. A. Atlatl, or spear thrower, were invented by them. I. In Tennessee, 8,000 years ago is when they lived. And C. Could stay in one place longer, so not nomadic, like paleo people. Okay, so I hope that helps you to understand what I want you to do for this week's task. Remember, you will have 4 acrostic poems, and you are using right here in bold the Cherokee name, Chickasaw, Creek, and Shawnee to make your poems based on the research that you did last week. I hope that example got all of your creative juices flowing in your brain and you are thinking of sentences that you want to start for each one of those groups and tribes. I want you to know that you are not alone and you can reach out to your teacher for help. But I do want to ask you to persevere first. Challenge yourself to use grit and to keep trying to figure it out, even if you feel that it's difficult.